Get it together, Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I really liked the Super Dentons.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying to remember. It's been so long since the Denton 85s. So I have to admit, I can't quite recall exactly how you felt about those speakers. I think if memory serves, you did like them, but I don't know if you liked them as much as these.
Well, look, coming off the emo THEVA speaker review, I was like, oh, hey, I appreciate you not trying to pound a hole into my head. It's the little things.
It's the little things.
You know? Jokes aside, welcome to episode 13 of Unplugged, our Wharfedale Super Denton episode.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you missed that review, first, why? Second, make sure you hit play on that video after you've watched this one. I've even left a link for you down below. But back to what I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a fan, definitely, of the Super Dentons.
Okay.
I definitely like them better than the Denton 85s. And the 85s, I think they're a little more typical of the Wharfedale heritage sound.
I mean, I think they help to define it for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these have a sound that's, to me, in my opinion, closer to the LINTON, which was a speaker I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was surprising. I was surprised that the Super Dentons were not more just kind of like a rebadged, bigger version of the 85s.
Yeah, they lean a little bit more LINTON, probably, yeah.
I thought intelligibility was pretty good.
It was all right.
Definitely not as good as the Lumina 2s or my benchmark Q Acoustic Concept 50s.
No.
But I think the Supers are respectable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, if you're watching anything with a poor mix or actors that mumble all day long, you're still gonna you may want to adjust something in your tone control or whatever. You're just gonna have to turn up the volume.
Yeah.
I did prefer the Arcam amp with the Super Dentons. Oh my God, the commonality between the names.
Yeah.
Is kind of killing me.
Not surprising, though, that Arcam A25 is just...
It's so good.
It's so good. It's so good.
I'm so disappointed no one really watched that video.
I know. It is criminal how many people are overlooking that A25.
Yeah, like y'all kill me sometimes. Like, I spent 4 years tracking this thing down. Finally get it, and it's crickets.
Yeah.
Crickets. So if you're watching this one, please go and watch the Arcam video because, frankly, you owe me. All right, let's just get right into some of the viewer questions now that everyone knows what I think.
Okay.
And that we know that's why they're here. Placement. I want to talk about the placement. We know that speaker placement can have a pretty huge impact on a speaker's sound. Yeah. Nate Drill and Mars both would like you to go into a little bit more detail, and let me read their questions really quick. Okay. Nate Drill says, I'd love to hear more about your process for finding the, quote, right amount of toe-in for a speaker. I always struggle with this, and I wonder if I'm getting the most from my speakers giving their placement in my room.
Okay.
And then Mars follows it up with, you mentioned speaker placement quite often, and I've picked up a few pieces over time, but I would love to hear a more comprehensive explanation of how to get the most of my speakers and effects of such things like toe-in, distance from the wall, etc.
Okay. Well, both of those questions are kind of the same, so you're just going to get one answer. I sort of cheat a little bit. Obviously, the more that you live with speakers and the more you live in a room, you start to learn placement. But initially, when you're just starting out in a room for the first time or a fresh pair of speakers, I sort of cheat a little bit. And I actually use measurement tools as well as obviously my ears. And it starts pretty simply with I pick the left speaker first. And I pick the left speaker, at least in our room, because it's the one that showcases the most room anomalies. The right speaker is what I ultimately measure whenever I'm showing you measurements and graphs on our channel, because the right speaker in our room is always measures better. And when I say measures better, it's less affected by the room because it doesn't have as many boundaries near it. So those of you watching this channel, if you're ever like, oh, what measurements are we seeing? You're always seeing the right speaker because it does not have corner loading and boundary reinforcement and stuff like that. So it's a more truer representation of the speaker and not the speaker and the room. But I always start with the left speaker. And if it's a speaker that I've never worked with before, I mean, from a brand that I'm just not familiar with, I park that bad boy right up against our front wall. And that's where I start. And I sit in the listening position with, no joke, a microphone basically like right here. And I know that's not exactly a one-to-one, but it's close enough. And I just start running some sweeps, and I see what the speaker's doing flat against our wall based on kind of what I think the sweeps sound like. And then I hit pause, I move the speaker out about a foot, do the exact same thing. Move it out about 2 feet, do the exact same thing. And based on that, I know how the bass is reacting in our room. And really, when it comes to rooms, you really kind of need to get that bass right because if the bass is too boomy, it's going to overshadow the mid-range, and it's even going to overshadow the treble. If it's too anemic, then your speaker's going to sound thin and bright, and you're going to wonder why everyone's calling XYZ speaker warm or lush or whatever. So once I get that dialed in, then I match it on the right side in terms of distance. Keep in mind, both speakers are still straight ahead. From there, I play a acoustic track with singer-songwriter, either Beth Hart, Sarah McLachlan's Freedom Sessions, Dominic Fils-Aimé, just something that doesn't have a lot of instrumental that can start to kind of distract me from what I'm really trying to do, and that is lock in that center. And so straight ahead, I hit play, and if the person is what I feel, very dimensional and very much placed so that when I'm sitting in my primary listening position and I go like this or like this, they don't bunch up to one side. We're there. We're golden. But if I have them straight ahead and the singer feels like they are 5 or 6 feet wide, or if I just lean 6 inches to the left, the sound travels to that left speaker, same for the right, that's when I go, okay, a little bit of toe in. And one of the easiest ways to do this and to make sure that your toe in is right, pro tip, I have a laser pointer. And this is something that I learned from Bob Hodis, who does this method. This was years ago. I tape the laser pointer using gaff tape to the top of the cabinet in line with the tweeter. I think Bob had a nicer laser pointer where he found a way to attach it to the tweeter itself. I just line it up with the tweeter, and then I start to point the speaker so that I can watch the red dot kind of come in towards my listening position. I start at my shoulder, and then I experiment until it's basically where my nose would be. And then I'm just somewhere in there. And that's how I do it.
That is so cool.
It's a bit nerdy, and it does take some time, but it pays off, and it results in what I feel is me getting to hear as much of the speaker as possible all the time.
Totally nerdy, but I think super helpful.
Well, I hope so.
Okay, so I want to move on to the grills. Jackson Fro asks, do you find that speaker grills frequently make a difference? I always thought it was a placebo effect, but your measurement prove otherwise. So just for reference, you found that the Wharfedales were better with their grills?
They are designed to have the grills on. A lot of speakers are, for the record. But with the Wharfedales specifically, they definitely can attenuate the treble. So with the grills off, it is possible that the Super Dentons will have a 1 to maybe 3 dB peak here and there in the tweeter. You put the grill on, that all comes into perfect alignment, which is another reason or defense for why maybe you would leave the grills on as the manufacturer intended. Grills matter. They do. They're not a placebo effect. Now, but here's the thing. A lot of speaker companies, and you have to read the manuals. I know, men, We're like, oh, manuals. But you have to read the manuals, because in the manual, it will state whether or not the manufacturer wants you to use the grills. A lot of speakers, they include grills for protecting the drivers from pets and kiddos and things like that. But if you read the manual, they'll say for like best results, you might want to take the grills off. But then other speaker companies are very direct in saying, leave the grills on. And it really is just a case-by-case basis. Now, more often than not, I have found that grills do two things. It can attenuate the tweeter 1 or 2 dB on average. It might knock the overall volume of a speaker back about a dB or so, but you can counterbalance that by just turning the volume up. But they're not a placebo. They're not a placebo, but it is on a speaker-by-speaker basis whether or not you should use them.
You know, if I'm being honest, a lot of times I can't really tell a difference whether the grills are on or off. I mean, on some speakers, yes, but not a lot of times. Like, it's like, sounds about the same.
Yeah,
So I could kind of see how he would say he always thought it was a placebo effect.
Yeah, I mean, toe-in or having a tweeter on axis with your listening position will likely produce more audible effects
Totally.
than taking a grill on or off. But as we learned with the Super Denton, having that toe-in plus the grill kind of brings it to neutral, whereas toe-in without the grill actually spiked the treble. So in a weird...
Which I kind of liked.
Yeah, in a weird way. I mean, it's just another form of tuning to a speaker that may or may not make it more versatile for a lot of people, you know, so...
Yeah, now that you brought that up, I am now remembering during our evaluation that while I totally agree with you, I think toe-in has a more perceivable impact on that over a grill on or off, being on or off. But I did find that I preferred the Wharfedale Super Dentons toed in, obviously. But without the grills. I do think that if you struggle with dialogue or if your hearing isn't like 100% like Andrew's, I think you might try the Super Dentons with the grills pulled off, and maybe it might benefit you. Something to consider.
Yeah, it's kind of just a free hack that Wharfedale includes. So, and that's why I ended my review the way that I did, where it's like, before you pass judgment, make sure that you experiment, because the Wharfedale Super Denton, probably more than any speaker we've had in a while, is really a tale of about 3 or 4 slightly different sounds that you could kind of get out of it based on how you set it up.
Right. Well, this kind of moves us into the next viewer comment.
Okay.
MH has some feelings.
Uh-oh.
I definitely think that MH will not agree with me about taking off the grills, because the MH made a point to note that Peter, whatever,
the designer.
Como.
I don't want to butcher the name, but yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Sorry if I mispronounced your name, Peter. That this person designed them to have the grills on. They are concerned that our room might be too big for the Super Dentons, and says they are probably more well suited to a smaller space. But he does acquiesce at the fact that overall you really like the speakers, speaks to their quality. I just was curious if you agree with MH that we were pushing the boundaries of the speakers in our room, because I guess they're smaller and our room's on the larger side.
I mean, at first, before you said, he acquiesced and says that because we did ultimately like the speaker, I was about to say kind of a weird comment, given that we had a very positive experience.
That's why you got to listen.
You got to listen.
Watch the whole video before you make a decision.
Do I think we were pushing the Super Denton beyond its capability? I don't, as evident in our positive response. I don't feel like at any point, even when occasionally I would let the speakers play into the upper 80s, low 90s at peaks, did I hear strain? I wouldn't take it any higher than that, but the room really didn't have much to do with that. Obviously, these will work in a smaller space, although, like I point out in my review, I don't know if these would be the best near field solution. So if you're planning on sitting 3 or 4 feet from these, you may end up with a radically different sound than what I'm describing. These really do want a minimum of about 6 feet between you and the speaker before all the drivers kind of coalesce and give you that response that you saw in our review. No, I mean, bass-wise, probably obviously these need a sub for that true full range playback, which is only going to open them up even more if you cross them over with the sub, taking that load off of the woofer, speaker, and your amp. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if I were to live with a speaker from Wharfedale long term or as a reference point for our room, I probably wouldn't pick the Super Dentons, even though they work. Or yeah, I would maybe go with a Linton or one of their other speakers that is a little bit larger, but that doesn't take anything away from the Super Denton.
Okay. That's fair.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about dips.
Dips.
And not the snack kind.
Okay.
Which I'd rather talk about. But let's see. We have a few people that commented about the dip at Dodd PR.
Okay.
Every time I hear about these mid dips, I ask this question: could it be that it's just part of the design, and they just missed it? I've heard people mention the same thing about the KLIPSCH RP600Ms, and they sound good to me.
Yep.
Then Scott Bennett says, I tried a different pair of Wharfedales, but they shared the same dip. Every time I listened, I always said to myself, if it weren't for that dip, these would be great. And then listen to the Nest. Says, I wonder if that dip is in the crossover region between the mid and the tweeter, and a cancellation is audible right in between when you're close to them. I bet this makes the original Denton a better choice for near field.
Now, you have to keep something in mind, though. Dips, while very easy to point to on a graph and go, aha, they're not as noticeable as peaks. There's a pretty sizable dip in the near field on the Super Denton, which is why I caution people that this particular dip may be noticeable, where you may notice that there seems to be just that slight bit of disjointedness from certain vocal ranges or instrument tones to the treble, and that treble may sound like it comes on pretty fast and quick out of nowhere with a little less transition in between. More often than not, a dip is okay, unless it's a giant valley. So I worry or I caution against people that say they can hear certain dips. I'm not saying it's particularly that I'm focusing on the Super Denton. This dip may be audible because it's pretty big. But there are some other dips that I know people like to point to in forums and stuff, and other people like to say, oh, I can fix it with EQ or I can fix it with different crossovers. Those dips may not be as audible or even audible. And they're not there by mistake. They're there because people who design speakers for a living, who have been around this stuff forever, realize that ain't audible. And so there's no point in trying to throw a bunch of money at it to bring it up just so that on a graph someone can go, aha, perfect. You know what I mean? If it ain't audible, you don't maybe need to worry about it, especially if you also know, because you're telling people in the manual, like, hey, you need to be at a distance of 6 or more feet. You need to have them set up this way. You need to leave the grills on. And if you do all of that, now look at the response. Sometimes I fear that measurements tell a worst case scenario and not a real world scenario. And it's important for them to show errors or problems and whatnot, but it's also important to look at those and realize or have the ability to say, but hey, just because it looks really bad, I still don't think this is something you need to lose sleep over. And that last part is what a lot of people leave out.
I mean, I think didn't that sort of happened with the emo THEVA speakers? I know
The opposite, yeah.
yeah, like some of the
Yeah.
people that are more focused on the measurements, but maybe don't really listen to the speaker. I saw a video where that person said, "Oh, it's perfect graph,
Yeah.
so it must."
Yeah, it's nothing.
And
it's,
so
it's
kind of
great.
give it a stamp of approval, but it's like, well, if you don't listen to it, it's quite the different experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I kind of agree with you. It could go either way.
It really can.
It's just rare that a speaker measures so well but sounds so freaking bad.
Yeah, yeah. I for one, I will tell you this much. When I see little dips and stuff like that in a speaker's response, I don't really care, because more often than not, some of those speakers turn out to be the better ones, and some of those speakers end up kind of universally being loved, for lack of a better way of describing it. But speakers that have measured like ruler, flat, or just like, oh my God, it's like the perfect Harmon curve and all of that jazz. I'm like, sometimes those suck out loud. Sorry. Subjectively. Like the emo TEVAs, those kept me up at night going, I don't understand. I'm going to have the hardest time trying to explain this to people because objectively, for whatever that speaker cost, $1,000, $1,200, it was amazing on paper. You couldn't give me those speakers for free. I couldn't get them out of here fast enough. Whereas the Wharfedale, it didn't look all that great at all frequencies, but boy, talk about a speaker you can just hit play and just, who cares? Just go about your day. It's one of the best, to use a term that's another type of video that's popular on YouTube, one of the best everyday carry speakers there is.
Well, going back to the first person that started off the dip conversation, Dodd PR, they brought up the KLIPSCH RP600Ms.
Yeah.
And I know for us, we felt that the Mark IIs were a much better speaker, and we prefer, at least our personal preference, we liked the Mark II better than the 600.
Yep.
And I don't recall if that was a dip result of a dip. I think if I remember correctly, the bass in the Mark II was just a little bit better controlled.
KLIPSCH did three things to the Mark II. They brought they tuned that port a little bit better. I believe they added one extra brace to the Mark II, which brought the bass down, made the speaker a little less boomy. I think they raised or lowered the crossover point between the woofer and the tweeter, which took the dip from being like this to, it was still there, but it, brought it up a little bit. So it likely brought it up to the point where it wouldn't be as audible. And then they rolled the tweeter down about 1 dB. And that did not result in a perfect linear speaker, but it resulted in the Mark II having less of a really hard V-shaped curve, which the Mark I had. Now, a lot of people like the Mark I. A lot of people like that quick, agile, just punchy bass, super in-your-face, articulate highs. And they felt that maybe the Mark II became a little bit more sleepy because it was more or less neutral in comparison. It's not a neutral speaker, but more or less neutral in comparison. I preferred the Mark II. Still had all of the things that I loved about the Mark I, but it was just way, way easier to live with and integrate in the room, unlike the Mark I.
Well, I want to go into some of the comparisons that you missed. It's okay. It's all right.
That's what these videos are for.
Yeah, no, this is.
All right.
We like that I like that you missed them, so we have something to talk about. At Pascal Newman says, "I love my Lintons. How do the Dentons compare to those in your opinion?"
I might be the only person. Now, there haven't been a lot of other reviews of the Super Dentons, so I say I might be the only person of like maybe 3 people. I don't think the Super Dentons are mini Lintons. I don't. they're their own thing. The Lintons are a heavier, darker, more laid back, more power hungry speaker, in my experience. The Lintons are going to sound larger, just straight up. If you find the Lintons to be more of like a Polk R700, where it's just like, come on, let's go, then maybe the Super Denton is what you're looking for. But make no mistake, the Super Denton is going to need a sub in order to match the outright performance when driven correctly of a Linton.
See, I completely disagree with your description of the Linton sound.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's been a while since I've heard it,
Yeah.
but I don't typically like the dark, slower feeling speaker sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I, from what I remember about the Linton,
Yeah.
it was completely the opposite of the 85th, whatever that's.
The Denton 85?
Yeah.
Oh,
Let's just
well,
call
sure.
it the Denton,
Yeah.
which is why I liked it.
Sure.
And for me, I feel that the Super Denton takes a little bit of a little more of the lively sound that I felt I was getting from the Linton and throws it in the Super Denton. But it's so funny because I feel like what you described and what I'm describing are very different.
I don't think they're too different. There's just two things to point out about our Linton review. And that is the Linton and the Super Denton have been reviewed on this channel in two very different rooms. But also, if I'm not mistaken, we carried out the Linton review with the Macintosh 7200, as well as a few other amps, but we did have it at the same time as the 7200. And that integrated will drive the sun. And that's what I mean when I say you've got to put the proper power to a Linton to get the most out of it. I do recall at one point we had the Lintons on the AXR 100, and it wasn't as good for you as it was when we jumped to like a Rotel or the 7200, which is what brought that dynamic snap to the Linton that they needed.
Okay.
That you can get to easier and with less outlay of cash with the Super Denton, because it simply is not going to have the bass the Linton is truly capable of when driven.
Moving on. Raymond Delgado
Okay.
would like a comparison between the Super Denton and the Wharfedale Evo 4.1, which you stated were fan-damtastic.
Yeah. It's really going to come down to whether or not you like a AMT folded motion ribbon-ish tweeter. Really is. Now, Wharfedale, in my humble opinion, they have the best implementation of a FMT, AMT style tweeter in the business. They really do, even at their more affordable levels. I don't know what they're doing that's different from everyone else, but I swear to you, Wharfedale gets that style of tweeter, at least for me, bang on, where I find those tweeters bordering on unlistenable in the hands of anyone else. That's it. That's going to come down to, do you want a soft dome or do you want that? I will say this much. The other Wharfedale is or has way better dispersion, a few less placement concerns. And if I'm not mistaken, it's a two-way, and it may work better in the near field compared to the Super Denton.
You're talking about the Evo now?
The Evo, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paolo Mix has a question about how these compare to the Heresy 4s. And I think that they sound nothing alike. There's no comparison.
No. The Heresy 4s, the Heresy 4s just sound bigger. They're going to not have room dependency, like size issues, like one of the viewers brought up earlier, like, oh, were the speakers too small for our room? You're not going to run into that with the Heresy 4. No dynamic limitations with the Heresy 4s, but some of you may find that the Heresy 4 relegates the soundstage a little lower than you might like, because they're floor mounted speakers. And some of you may find them to be on the brighter, more projecting side, that live recreation of sound type vibe. I happen to think it can be quite nice when set up correctly, but some people just, they get it in their head and they're just like, no, you know. Heresy 4s are still great speakers, just like with any speaker, setup, power, you know, matters. Not a lot of power, but the right power.
I personally love the Heresy 4s. And if you like that sound, if you like a live sound, then I think definitely go with the Heresy 4s.
Yeah.
As much as I like the Super Denton,
Yeah.
I think I would be happier with the Heresy 4s if I, you know, could only have one speaker to live with. And, you know, thankfully that's not the case for us. I think that the Heresies there's just something about them. I almost think they sound even more vintage than the Super Dentons, which didn't have, while they were kind of neutral, they did not have what I think is a typical, like, warm, laid-back sound, which is how I feel. That's what I think of when I think of a vintage speaker.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I think the Heresies are laid back, because they sure as hell aren't.
Yeah.
But there is something sort of syrupy about them.
There's a slight vagueness. It's the wall of sound. It's that big wall of sound that the Heresies can do or have. I mean, again, with some toe in, you can focus them up quite a bit, but straight ahead, yeah, they have that just kind of broad brush sound. That scale with zero issues.
Right. I mean, we have a ton of speakers that come in and out of this house for review.
Yeah.
And those are a pair of speakers that we've had for years now.
Yep.
And even though I know we could open up some space in our storage unit to by getting rid of those,
Yeah.
every time we talk about it,
She won't let me sell
I'm
them.
like, I can't let you get rid of them.
She won't let me sell the Heresy 4s, the Cornwall 4s. Not that I want to sell the Cornwall 4s. The more time I spend with those, the more I'm like, damn, these are really good.
Cornwalls we pull out a little more often way more often than the Heresies. The
yeah.
Heresies rarely see the light of day, but I can't
part with
see letting them go anywhere else,
Yeah.
you know? So
No.
I don't know if that helps you,
Yeah, who
Paolo, but maybe it does. And the last viewer question I want to bring up is
Okay.
Francis Contenti. How would you compare the Focal Vestia #1 to the Super Dentons? And I know Andrew's like, is the Vestia the one we like or the one we didn't?
Which one's the cheapest one? Which one's the cheapest one?
I think
Damn you,
it's-
Focal, man.
I
Damn
think
you.
the TEVA.
I thought the
is
TEVA was
one.
the cheapest one.
So it's the TEVA we like.
We like the TEVA line. We don't like the Vestia line. There's your answer. There's your answer. The cheapest Focal is the better speaker until you want to start spending more money. I would probably go Super Denton. Not because I think like, oh, yours is a better speaker or anything like that. I just really like the look. I think the Super Dentons look really good. I know we got the black finish, but I can attest to Wharfedale's, walnut finish. I just think it's a nice, classy, albeit boxy speaker that, at least in our room, it just kind of looked the part. Whereas sometimes Focal has really great finishes and looks really nice, and sometimes they just look really cheap. And their new stuff on the cheaper side performs very well, but some of the finish choices leave me a little bit, Whereas I think Wharfedale at any tier, just kind of nails the little things.
I 100% agree with you. And you guys watch the channel often.
Mm-hmm.
You know I'm not a big fan of black boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And even like Andrew said, yes, the Super Denton comes in multiple finishes, but we were sent the black the black pear. And I actually thought they looked really good.
It's one of the better black oaks I've ever seen.
Well, I think that covers everything.
All right, well, that's it.
Yep.
That's it. Another episode of Unplugged in the books. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to tune in Sunday. We're still a little bit on our vintage kick, but this one, I think not because we've set it up this way or planned it. I think it just sort of worked out this way. I think we're about to have the first ever review of another surprisingly good vintage speaker, inspired vintage speaker. So tune in Sunday for that. Anyway, that's it. So what do you say? How do we close this out?
The only person that has to like the sound.
Oh, that's on reviews. What do you say when you want to get the hell out of here?
I just say bye.
Bye. Take care, guys. See you on Sunday.